Alrighty, this is our week 3 PowerPoint for FAM 401. By this point, you should have selected your agencies. You've called all of your agencies last week, and you've found one to agree to let you complete your project with them. You've given me their contact information, and I'll be following up with those agencies this week. We are going to take a slight break in our progress towards that portion of this class. We're not going to take any more steps further in your FLE program design this week. We're going to take a second and learn a little bit more about that design before we take any more steps forward. And we will pick up with that next week in designing your LNRAs. Alrighty. So for this week, we're going to review a little bit of what we talked about last week. We're going to talk about LNRAs, which are Learning Needs and Resources Assessments. Those are going to be your discussion post for next week. It's going to be the first piece of your actual binder that you're putting together. That's also going to be the first piece of discussion post that you're required to respond to your peer partners according to that format that was outlined in the PowerPoints last week. And that's coming up next week. So if you get a little bit confused or off track in that process, make sure to refer back to that PowerPoint from last week. We're going to talk about the 7 design steps. Those are coming straight from your text, your Vela text, and then we are going to discuss your homework for this coming week. Alrighty, so our objectives, what we hope to accomplish together this week. We're going to describe the components of an effective needs assessment. Again, that's your LNRA. We're going to assess your listening skills, and then we're going to examine the 7 design steps of effective programming. So just a quick review. Last week we talked about risk and protective factors. We talked about how the goals of family life education are to increase those protective factors. Things like having an invested parent involved in a child's life, having food to eat, having a healthy body, having a lot of resources at your disposal. All those are considered protective factors. And then we talked about reducing risk factors. Things like having an unstable home environment, children not knowing what type of discipline to expect, things like not having a safe place to go at night where you're not able to get good sleep, you don't have adequate food sources. All those kinds of things are going to be risk factors. And again, the goal of family life education is to reduce those risk factors. We also talked about resiliency. We discussed that resiliency is the idea that someone is able to overcome a not so great situation. They're able to kind of rise above their circumstances and still be really successful in moving through the phases of life despite the challenges that they face. We also talked about, with the risk and protective factors and resiliency, we also talked about the fact that everyone's resilient at some point in their life. And we discussed that everybody has protective factors and everybody has risk factors. And our job as family life educators is to come in and, again, increase those protective factors and reduce the risk factors. And oftentimes that's just working with what already exists in a family environment. They've already got protective factors. We're just going to pull those out and utilize them. They've got risk factors. We're going to minimize the effect that that has on them. And in doing so, we're going to help them be resilient. We also talked about the effective group facilitator. We thought back to what type of teachers have been our favorite teachers, what type of teachers have been our least favorite teachers, and those qualities that made them really good facilitators or teachers for us. And we looked at a list of characteristics of things that tend to make someone a good facilitator. And then we walked through several different types of facilitation. So we looked at the expert approach, just to name a couple. The expert approach is what we think about with that typical type of teaching. It's going to be where you've got someone standing at the front lecturing. There's very little input from the audience. All the way to the eclectic approach, which involves melding together different pieces of all of the different types of facilitation that we discussed. Okay, and then lastly, last week we talked about dialogue education, and that's the type of education that you're going to be using for your presentations. Dialogue education takes seriously the importance of safety and belonging, so it really values creating an environment where people can feel welcome and where they can feel like they belong. And it also values creating a safe environment where people feel free to ask questions and also offer, input that they have towards your presentation. So they're just not afraid to speak up. They feel safe enough in that environment to offer their 2 cents on what you're saying or to ask questions about it. This involves listening to learners at every level. We talked about how that involves actually listening to what they're saying, as well as monitoring body language and the feel of the room. We're going to talk a little bit more about listening this week. And then dialogue education prepares content in a way that it connects to people's lives. We don't ever want to come in and talk at people about something that they don't care about. We're going to create our entire programs based around our audience and make sure that it connects directly to their lives. Alrighty, so to talk about learning needs and resources assessments, you're going to see them mostly listed as LNRAs from here on out. We're not going to get into this in super great detail. We're going to kind of go over what it is and the process of that. And then next week we're going to review some of this and then get into the details of how you're going to create your LNRA. So a learning needs and resources assessment is accomplished 3 main ways: by asking, studying, and observing. So for the first one, asking, we're going to ask them with a survey. That survey is what you're creating for your discussion post next week, and that's going to be called your LNRA, your Learning Needs and Resources Assessment Survey. And it's going to ask them questions about what they need, what they enjoy about their job, what challenges do they face at their job, different things like that. And that's going to give you a lot of good information. But we're also going to study them. So when I say research your agencies, I don't mean just find out a couple of things about what they do. I mean really research your agency. The more you know about them, the way they work and operate, and what they seek to do, the better your presentation is going to be. And so you're going to study everything you can find out about your agency, as well as the people that work there. And then lastly, observing. That's going to be observing your audience in their own setting, and that falls into your service learning hours. So you've got a total of 5 service learning hours. During that time, you're going to be volunteering at your agencies, but you're also observing them during that time. You're looking at how things work, observing their communication patterns, observing how they interact with their clients or the people that they serve, observing the things that are really great about what they do, observing the challenges that they face, and just making general mental notes about the overall environment of your agency. So those are the 3 main components of our needs assessments. The purpose of your needs assessment is to inform your course design, not form it. So based on what you gather, all the intel that you gather from your survey, from your studying, and from your observations, you're going to kind of pick your main topics for your presentation. You're going to take everything you've learned and say, this is what I'm going to present on based on what I saw about my audience when I was observing, and what they told me when I was talking to them, what I learned about them from my research, and what I heard from them in my survey. But that doesn't dictate every single part of your presentation. Your learners are going to have a voice too. So the people that you're presenting to at your agency, they're going to have a say in what's going on as well. You're going to make sure you're considering them. You're going to talk with them about your intended topics, and you really want everything that you're doing to meet them where they are. You want to respect who they are. You want to respect the mission of their agency, and you want to meet them exactly where they are and kind of help them get to the next place. And then that's going to address the assumptions that you have about people. Whenever we're observing people or interacting with new people, especially for the first time or the first couple of times, we can form some assumptions about them. And we want to make sure that we're not doing this with our agencies. We don't want to assume anything. We want to partner with them. We want to work with them and alongside them We don't want to be this source coming in from the outside who just assumes we know everything about them. We really want to make sure that we find out from them exactly what's going on and exactly what they need. Alrighty, so there's different types of LNRAs. There's a short survey, which is what you all will be doing. Your surveys will have anywhere from 3 to 4 questions. We want them to be short questions that are easy to answer, they're easy to decipher, and they don't really involve a whole lot of in-depth thought. They should be things that your audience can think of right away. So what do you enjoy about your job? That's something they can come up with pretty easily. They don't have to spend a whole lot of time thinking about that. You could also do telephone surveys. We're not going to use those here in our class because it's just going to be easiest for us to go to our agencies during our service learning hours and pass out your surveys. But telephone surveys are a way of accomplishing learning needs and resources assessments, and oftentimes whenever people use telephone surveys, they're followed up by an email survey. But again, we're just going to stick to your short paper-based 3-4 question survey. Research through websites, that's going to fall under that study category of your LNRA. So we've got Ask, Study, Observe. Website research is going to be where you're doing some of that studying. You're going to pull up the agency's website. You're going to pull up what research has been done about your agency. Some of your agencies will have a lot more research done on them than others. So if you're partnering with DHS or Head Start, there's a lot of literature out there on those agencies that can give you really good insight about what you're walking into and what you're working with at your agency. Some of your agencies are small nonprofit or childcare businesses in your local communities, and there might not be a whole lot of research on them. So you're just going to rely on their actual websites or their brochures or their information pamphlets that they have for that kind of research. And then your informal dialogue is going to come into play while you're completing your service learning hours. You're observing them, you're talking with them, and you're really getting a full scope of what's going on at that agency. And just a note, in order to start your investigative process, so to start your LNRAs, to start looking into what's really going on at your agency, you have to have permission from the appropriate authorities and the participants themselves. And this can be formal or informal. Hopefully for the most part it's going to be informal for us, but what this means is after you've created your surveys, before you pass them out at your agency, you need to get a supervisor's approval to do that. You don't want to just walk into an agency that you're new to and start passing out a survey. You need to get a supervisor's approval, and then you never want to force someone to complete it. You want to gain their permission by asking them to do it and getting them to complete that survey of their own will. You don't want the supervisor telling them they have to complete the survey, because then you might not get the best, most honest answers. So you really, really want permission and full participation from everybody on their own. All right. And when we're gathering and getting our information from our learning needs and resources assessments, we're going to gather information on what our agencies need, and there's going to be 3 types of needs that are going to be the kind of guiding categories for what we find in our research and in our surveys. The first category is going to be the felt needs. So these are the needs of the potential learner that they specifically tell you. They're going to be based on their experiences and their culture. This is going to be what they tell you they need when you're talking with them, what they tell you they need when they're filling out their surveys. The felt needs is what the learner feels that they need, and they're pretty much just going to tell you that directly. Okay? Then we've got the ascribed needs. Ascribed needs are identified by someone other than the learner. So that can happen in a few different ways. Say you're working at a childcare center and you're presenting to the lead teachers, and you talk with the childcare director and get her input, his or her input as well, during your observations and your gaining of knowledge and your passing out of your surveys. Say your director of that childcare center tells you things that he or she feels like the lead teachers at the center need to do better on, or things they need more support in. Those are ascribed needs. So that's someone else, that's their boss, telling you what they think that the teachers need. The ascribed needs can also come into play from you. You're an outsider coming in. You're not the learners. You're going to observe your learners and find out what you think they need. So that's you, someone else, saying, this is what I think these learners need. Okay, so your ascribed needs can come from you. They can also come from within the agency themselves if someone other than your intended audience is telling you what they think your audience will need. Then lastly, we have future needs. These are needs that can be expressed either by your audience, by your learners, or by someone else, but they're needs that help them prepare for developmental changes that are to come. So these are going to be educational programs that are preparing for something happening in the future. So an example of that would be an educational program for parents-to-be. So they're not parents yet, they're about to have a child, and you're presenting an educational program for them in order to help them prepare for that future need. Another example would be an educational program for parents of children who will soon be adolescents. Having a young child versus having an adolescent is two very different things. And so if you're working with families to help them transition into adolescence, having children with adolescence, that would be helping them with a future need. They've got a child who is going to be in adolescence, and you're helping them transition into that phase. So those are the three types of needs that are going to be seen in your learning needs and resources assessments and all of your information gathering. You'll have felt needs, ascribed needs, and future needs. So we want to take a second and think about how well you're listening, because the main part of your LNRA is going to be your interactions with your audience. You're going to have your surveys that you're going to pass out, and that's going to give you a lot of good information. But if what you find out in your surveys doesn't match what you find out in your conversations with people while you're volunteering, you're not going to be in a good place. You want to make sure that when you're listening to your audience, you're finding out information about them, you're listening in such a way that you're hearing what they're telling you, and that should line up with what you find out in your surveys as well. Ideally, everything that you learn about your agency in your LNRAs is going to kind of come together and culminate in a main need for that agency. And so in a way, your LNRA can be described as a state of mind and a listening stance of a good educator. As dialogue education, family life education facilitators, we want to make sure that we are really good listeners. So within your materials folder for week 3, you're going to find a quick survey. This is just a snippet of that survey. It's just a few of the statements. What you're going to do in that survey, go ahead and download it and take it for yourself. Basically, it has a bunch of different statements that talk about ways of listening. And then you're going to rank yourself on each statement. And at the end, you're going to tally your score, and there's kind of a breakdown of all the different possible scores, and it tells you how good of a listener you are based on your responses to the different statements on this survey. So if we take a couple seconds to look through, we can see some of the sample questions of what this survey is going to talk about. Things like, I'm interested in what other people have to say. I don't interrupt when someone is speaking. I ask for clarification of words when they're used. Listening attentively, even when you think you know what's going to be said. Just different things that would make you a good listener. And I would really encourage you to download that and kind of take inventory of your listening skills, because it's going to be really, really important when you get to your agency to make sure that you're building a solid relationship with them that's foundation is safety. And if they're trying to talk to you about their agency, they've just met you, they've agreed to let you complete your project with them, and you come in and you're trying to talk to them, but you're distracted and you're not really listening very well while they're trying to talk to you about what their agency needs, that's not going to create a very safe environment. We talked about how dialogue education really, really values a safe environment, and that relationship, building that safety, starts from day one when you walk into your agency. You're building that safe relationship from the beginning. It's not just something that you create during your presentation. It's something that you're working on from day one, and being a really good listener is part of that. So make sure you're taking stock of your listening skills. and seeing kind of where you need to improve and what your strengths are when you're listening to others. This quote by Woodrow Wilson says, I not only use all of the brains I have, but all that I can borrow. And that kind of encapsulates the LNRA process. So, with our needs assessments, we're saying we are qualified educators. We're seniors. We're about to graduate. We've learned a lot during our time here. And so we have a lot of really, really good brains to offer to this situation. But we also want to borrow all of the knowledge that we can from our agencies because we know that we don't know everything about where they work. Although we are really qualified family life educators, we still need to understand our audience and know who they are and where they're coming from. And so we want them to partner with us in telling us what they need. All right, when is pretty straightforward, but it does require considerable consideration of your audience. So you have to consider a time that's convenient for your audience, and you must consider a length that is appropriate. So for you, you don't necessarily have to pick your length that's already been determined for you as part of the assignment, 30 to 35 minutes, but you do want to consider a time that is convenient for your audience. So if you have if you're working with teachers at a child development center, you probably don't want to pick before the kids get there as the time that you're going to present to them. You're not going to want to ask them to get to work at 6:30 so that they can hear your presentation 30 minutes before the kids get there at 7. They're not going to be in a good mood. There's a good chance they're not going to show up. You also might not want to pick after work. They might be really tired and really grumpy, and they might not care what you have to say at that point. Usually a good time for people who are working at child development centers or with classrooms or Head Start locations, a good time to do this is going to be on a lunch break or during a time when you can get multiple of the teachers or staff members together in the break room during the day. And it always helps to provide some kind of snack for them. So you can say, if you spend your break doing this, this is going to be your reward. You're going to get this information that you've already told me that you want, and we're going to have some snacks provided for you. So make sure you're considering a time that works best for your audience. Where is very similar, sounds straightforward enough, but you want to make sure that you honor the life situation of your participants. So your location needs to be safe, it needs to be accessible and adequate, and it needs to be agreed upon between you and your agency and the supervisor of your agency. Sometimes the break room is not the best place. If you've got an audience that's too large to fit in the break room, if there's not going to be enough seats for everybody there, don't pick the break room, pick the conference room. If you are working at an agency where there's childcare going on, there's children playing, probably don't pick the playground or the gym, right? Pick a location that works for your audience and that makes sense for them. And again, going back to why the who is the most important, it's going to be really hard for you to consider your audience with your when and your where if you haven't thought about who they are. If you don't know a lot about who they are and what they need and what their life is like at work, it's going to be hard for you to pick a good when and a good where location. All right, so this is going to be the content of your presentation. What are you presenting to them? You're going to pick this based on your needs assessment. So your survey and your asking and your studying of your audience is going to tell you what you need to present, the actual content. And that should be stated as a noun, so time management, communication, client resources, communicating with clients, things like that. Those are going to be the types of content that you're likely going to end up presenting. And again, it doesn't need to be something that you pick on your own. It needs to be something that you see as a need from your observations, as well as something that they've told you during your conversations with them and your surveys that you get completed by them. This is also represented in the agenda. So each week in class in here, at the beginning of the PowerPoint slide, there's an agenda that tells you what we're talking about, tells you the content of the presentation for this week. When you put together your presentation, you're going to have an agenda at the beginning, and that's going to tell you what your presentation is about. Next, you've got your what for. These are stated as verbs, and they express your achievement-based objectives, or your ABOs. You are going to be creating your objectives, just like we have in here each week, our objectives for what you want to accomplish. This is also identified by the needs assessment. It goes right along with your what, and it says, okay, we know what we're being taught, but why, what for? Why are we being taught that? And that should say, what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to be different by the time that we leave here today? So that's your new learning by your audience. It expresses what your learners will have done with the content that you teach them in order to learn it. So dialogue education understands that learners learn best, especially adult learners, by actually interacting with the content, by actually doing something with it, rather than just being taught. So each week in this class, you're actually practicing and putting together the different parts of your binder that we're going to teach you about. And that's going to be expressed through your achievement-based objectives. Our objectives are going to represent what you're going to learn each week in class and what you're going to do with that knowledge. Your objectives for your presentation are going to express what your learners are going to do with the knowledge that you give them and what you teach them about. Okay, so some examples of your what for. And these examples are going to apply to you. These are some objectives for this class as a whole. So by the end of the semester, students will create and implement an LNRA for a specific audience. So what for, why are you in this class, what's going to be the outcome, is that you're going to create and implement an LNRA for your audience. You're going to be able to do that by the end of this class. Another what for is that by the end of the semester, all of you will utilize dialogue education within a community setting. So what for, why are you learning about dialogue education so that you can use it within a community setting? Lastly, what for, why are you in this class, why are you learning about family life education so that you can present a family life education program using appropriate technology. And your ABOs, or your achievement-based objectives, tell what the learner will begin to do in order to learn the material. So what are they going to do with that material that helps them learn it? And then what skills are they going to be able to walk away from your presentation with? What's going to be new and different about them that they can do now that they've learned what you taught them? All right, and lastly is your how. This is your action plan for your program. How are you going to accomplish those objectives? How are you going to teach them about your content area? And that's going to be a sequence of learning activities or learning tasks designed to achieve your objectives. So in the first week I mentioned that you're not just going to be up there talking for 30 to 35 minutes, but you're going to have different activities throughout your presentation that actually let your audience practice what you're teaching them. And that's going to happen through your how, or through your learning activities. So you're going to have an activity that helps them to learn about communication, if communication is your topic. If time management is your topic, you're going to have activities that help them to learn about time management. And all of your activities are going to be very pointed and targeted to specifically help your audience accomplish your objectives. And so your FLE program design, that big project, that binder that you're putting together for the end of the semester, and again, when I say binder, I mean that giant Word document you're putting together. That program design is going to include all of the 7 design steps. So what we're going to do, all right, so a quick once over. We've got who, why, when, where, what for, and how. So we're going to take a second and look at how those specifically plug into your FLE program design and your discussion questions that we're doing each week. Okay, so your who, the first step of who relates to your audience description. You're going to be making a 3-page audience description. That's one of your papers for this course. And that's going to go in your final binder. You're going to have a copy of your audience description in there. And that answers that who question of your 7 design steps. Your why is pretty straightforward. Your why is going to answer the why portion of your binder. So in your binder, you're going to actually have a tab or a section that says why. And you're going to have typed out in a couple of paragraphs an example of why your audience needs your presentation. Your when, that's going to be the actual time of your presentation at the end of the semester at your agency. And that actual time is going to be listed on your marketing tool. So you're going to create a marketing tool that is going to be a flyer for your agency that just advertises your presentation to them and says, hey, this is when our program is going to be. So that flyer is also going to say where your program is going to be. Where is the actual location or place of your presentation. And that's also going to be present on your marketing tool. Your what is going to be represented by your concepts. So your what, again, is your content. What are you presenting on? What are your main topics? That's going to be in your concepts section of your final FLE program design binder. Your what for, like we talked about, is going to be in your learning objectives. Why are they learning this? What are they going to accomplish? That's going to be seen in your objectives. How. So how are you going to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish in your presentation? How are they going to learn what you're teaching them? That's going to be represented in your learning tasks portion of your project, as well as your materials section. So you're going to have a section that says learning tasks, and that's going to outline your activities for your presentation. And then you're going to have a section that says materials, and that's just going to outline all of the materials that you're going to need to put together your presentation. Okay, so that is how each of the 7 design steps relates directly back to your program binder that you're putting together for this class. Okay, so your week 3 homework, there is no discussion question this week. We're taking a quick break from those. We'll pick right back up with them next week. So your only homework for this week is Critique 2. I would recommend that you stay in contact with your agency this week. Just send a follow-up email or call thanking them for letting you complete your program with them, just so you can stay in touch so that they don't think you just disappeared over the week. So do follow up somehow with your agency, but your only specific homework as far as turning things in is going to be Critique 2 for this week. As always, if you have a question or concern, please shoot me an email.